So the indicative tax rate conversation that you had just at the end of the meeting there, obviously there were some different opinions about how that conversation should be approached. So what does council need to do to sort of come to agreement on that, whether you're talking about a freeze or going a bit farther than that?
They just have to decide. The worst thing to do would be to send administration, who are already so busy in these COVID times, away without any direction. So council just has to come to a consensus. I think the freeze is the right consensus, remembering that a freeze includes $24 million in findings from our SAVE program, because we pushed that forward a year. And so ultimately, I think that's correct. If council would like to go further, I think that's a mistake in a time of economic recovery, but it is their prerogative. The problem today was they didn't have any alternatives.
Well, because you spoke about the, I think you said the 9-figure deficit that the city is looking at. Do we know anything more about what kind of position the city is going to be in by the end of the year? I know there's been quite a bit of discussion about that.
Let's remember that if we believe that the deficit is directly related to COVID and it's a one-time deficit, then it would be a big mistake to incorporate all of that into the base budget, because it's something that you would then pay off over a couple of years if you think ridership on transit is coming back, and if you believe that what was I going to say? If you believe that rec facilities will come back and so on. So it just really underscores the fact that the deficit is a one-time event, unlike with provincial and federal governments, but that we really do need the provincial and federal governments to give us a backstop on that, because otherwise, to pay back that deficit, that one-year deficit, our only choice is to increase taxes or cut services in a massive way, neither of which are particularly tenable as you're coming out of a recession.
Okay, the next question here is from Scott Dipple. Seeing how most people don't talk about credit facilities, financial covenants, and debt servicing ratio averages, can you explain in clear language what help the Calgary Stampede is seeking from the city regarding its financial challenges?
No, it's very complicated. I can try. So the idea is that under the Stampede's existing loans, they have to maintain a certain ratio of their income to their debt. This is as simple as I can say it. But because, of course, there was no Stampede this year, there was much, much lower income. So they will be in a technical breach of this. A lot of companies, a lot of organizations in the city around the world really are in this situation for COVID. However, because we do believe the Stampede will come back and the Stampede has a strong financial balance sheet, this is really just a technical breach. However, it's important for us to address this so that they're not in default on their loans for something that we know they'll be able to pay back over time.
Okay. Madeline, I see your hand is raised. Is this question also? Oh, apologies, Madeline. Let me put you on hold for just a moment. Scott does have a follow-up, and he asks...
Why is Scott not asking?
I don't know. Okay, but does Stampede want money from the city?
No. No, not at this point. They certainly are looking for some assistance from the other orders of government, but there has been no request for money from the city, just because the city is a guarantor, I think is the way you pronounce that, of some of their loans. They need to be released from some of the requirements of the loan. It's quite a reasonable request.
All right, Madeline, back to you.
I had a quick question about masks once again. You had mentioned in the meeting today that council will be discussing mandatory masks on Monday. So can you give us a sense of what that conversation is? Is there a motion or a bylaw, or is this just talking to council about what can be done? What's going to happen?
Administration will be seeking direction from council on what to do in a number of areas. Number one, of course, is transit that we've talked a lot about. The second is around city-owned facilities and operated facilities like the library, maybe rec centers, though rec centers, I imagine it would be hard to have masking in place. And then the third is, should the city go further And should we mandate mask wearing in retail stores? Obviously not in restaurants or bars, but in other kinds of stores. Or should we go as far as they have in Quebec and Ontario and require mask wearing in all indoor spaces? And so the idea on Monday is really get a sense from council on what they want to do. And if they want to go further than requiring it on transit and city facilities, then that would require a bylaw. But that bylaw probably would take until September to get in place.
Okay, so would you have to create a new bylaw for transit and city-owned facilities?
I don't believe so. I think transit, I think council can simply provide that direction to the city administration, and they can just do it since we own those spaces.
So that would be implemented this summer potentially if that was what you did, but any broader
council's desire. To be honest with you, I don't really know what council wants to do here. I certainly have a point of view on this, but I know that members of council have been out in the community a lot. So I really want to hear what they have to say as well.
Okay, your next question is from Jordan Canagan with CTV. Why is it important for council to have a conversation about renaming James Short Park now?
You know what? I think we have to have a broader conversation about naming and monuments and the things that we do. And in fact, one thing most people don't know is we changed the naming policy after I became mayor to be more inclusive, to really address a lot of folks who have built this community but maybe have not been recognized. So I'm pleased that work has gone forward. In terms of James Short Park, this particular issue, we're having a conversation right now about a new plan for Chinatown. And I actually did not know, even though I love local history so much, that the naming of that park on the edge of Chinatown has long been a sore spot for many folks in Chinatown because Mr. Short had pushed hard to not have Chinatown there. And because he basically said, these are not the kinds of folks and the kinds of businesses that we want in the downtown. So I certainly understand that why in the world would the city have named a park right in the neighborhood that he didn't want after this gentleman. And I'm very happy to have that conversation. The motion doesn't say change the name, but it says go out to the community and see if changing the name is warranted. And I think that is a conversation we should be having, particularly in these times where we are rethinking what it means to be anti-racist.
There's a follow-up question to masks from Jenna Freeman with Global News. You mentioned that you want to hear the other councillors' views on this, but can you give us your views on mandatory masks?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've been very clear about this. I think the level of mask wearing is much too low. And I think that the science is very clear that if we can increase the percentage of people wearing masks, the likelihood of us having to go backwards on economic reopening, or the likelihood of us not ever getting to phase 3, and the likelihood of getting kids back in school in the fall become much more likely to get kids back in school in the fall, much less likely to be able to go backwards. In fact, I've read studies that show if you can get above 75 or 80% masking, that is as good as the kinds of isolation measures that we put in place in March and April. So it's a relatively small sacrifice to protect others. And I want to remind everybody, the mask doesn't protect you, it protects other people from you. And as such, it really is a community service to wear a mask. And I've been talking about this for months, but I do feel like our level of mask wearing, especially on transit and particularly in stores, is not as high as it should be in order to protect the public health. And frankly, I want to keep those businesses open. I want to keep the economy going. I want to get back to a level of activity like it was before, but that is going to require people to keep their distance, to do the good hygiene things like wash your hands and don't touch your face, and to wear masks when they're in a position where they can't consistently stay 2 meters away from others indoors. And that means transit and stores, basically.
The next question is from Scott Dipple.
Mayor, do you have a sense yet from the June 30th tax deadline, such as it was for some, how city tax revenues have been impacted this year versus last year?
Darn, I wish I had asked that question at committee today because it's an important one that has been on my mind. I paid mine on June 30th, but I don't know the answer, but that is something well worth exploring, so I will find out.
Okay, thank you.
And the next question is from Madeline Smith.
Hi again. I know that Dr. Dina Hinshaw just addressed media and Albertans, and she, as well as Premier Jason Kenney, have said they're concerned about some of the increasing COVID numbers in recent weeks. So, what is your reaction to that, and does that impact your thinking on the mask issue as well?
Yeah, 100%. I know that one of my colleagues was quoted in the press saying, well, things are way better now. We should have had masks before. We don't need them now. That's not good thinking, because if you wait until you're in the middle of an outbreak, it's too late. The virus is out there in the community. And right now, at the point where we've kind of got it down, is really the opportunity to not let it rise up again. So certainly we've been flirting over the last few days back to triple-digit increases in the number of cases. The number of active cases in Calgary stubbornly remain in the 250 to 300 range. They're not going down. And while our hospitalizations and our ICU rates are very good, and Calgarians have done a great job keeping those down, ultimately, if the infections go up, those are going to go up too. And we now have more active cases than we had when we locked everything down in March. So clearly, these numbers are going in the wrong direction. But as I've said many times, we can't control the floodwater, we can't control the hailstorms, but every one of us in our own hands can control the spread of the pandemic. And Calgarians just need to double down. Social distance, it really matters. And I've seen a lot of it being violated outdoors and indoors. You got to wash your hands, you got to not touch your face, and you got to wear a mask. Those three things are critical.
And then I just quickly wanted to follow up about a question that has now left my mind. The anti-racism work and the systemic racism hearing from last week. Has council arrived at any other decisions about what might be added to those recommendations that you talk about next week, or have any additional conversations been had about that at this point?
I'm sure that many members of council are talking about this right now. I've been a little busy, so I have not yet engaged deeply on that. I imagine that there will probably be some changes to strengthen the language of what came out. But remember that unlike in other cities where they did the hearings first, council had already passed a motion requiring a bunch of work to be done at the city, and that work continues to be underway.
Wants to know, with hockey returning, any concerns about the Red Mile and people gathering at bars in time of pandemic?
Yeah, don't do it. Remember, there are still physical distancing requirements inside restaurants and bars, and there are certainly physical distancing requirements outdoors. And this year is the year to enjoy Flames playoff hockey as they go deep into the playoffs at home.
The question from Scott, any reaction to the Lethbridge police issue with Shannon Phillips? Could that happen here and result in small penalties?
Sorry, what was that last bit?
The follow-up is, can that happen here and result in small penalties?
Is now exiting.
Well, listen, I don't know much about that situation other than what I have heard and read. It is absolutely shocking. Certainly this is something that women in politics face. It is something that people who are different from the norm face. And whether you agree or disagree with someone, she's the Minister of Environment. She was elected to do that job at that time. And it is an absolute disgrace to put her under surveillance, for the police to abuse their power in that way, whether they agree or disagree. The tribunal wording was pretty strong, and I would underline that if we have a system where people are using the police in that way, if police officers are acting in that way, then you start to question the public trust in the system. And that is what everything in our society is based on. So I was really shocked to see that, frankly.